Studying man is like chasing one's own shadows. Philosophers, seers, and saints have tried their own varying methods to study man during the past few centuries. However, it was not until Charles Darwin brought out his spectacular treatise on origin of species that anthropology took up the shape of a scientific discipline. Anthropology began as a scientific discipline of study from the beginning of this century. Does it mean that anthropology and medical science don't vary? Let us see whether it does. We start by accepting man as another variety of an animal. We study its bones, tissues, and nerve centers, and still we find, we may dissect it to the end, but still we find that we don't know him completely. For instance, we won't know his language, we won't know his customs.
In other words, we recognize that while any specific animal, no matter where it is found, behaves identically, man does not. That is, a dog behaves in the same way, whether it is in Japan or Africa, but man in these regions might behave in remarkably different ways. Consequently, we have to accept that this specific animal called man cannot be defined entirely on the basis of his physical being. His behavior constitutes an equally important component of his definition. Anthropology, therefore, commits itself to study not only the physical and cultural dimensions of contemporary man, but also man through his past antiquity.
The branch that studies the physical anthropology of the past has been named as human paleontology. In the same light, the branch that studies the cultural behavior of man of the past has been named as prehistoric archaeology. Therefore, we see that anthropology has 4 distinct subdisciplines, each one of them having their own distinct methodology and approach of study. Any student of biology might be surprised how one can go about studying the physical features of man with those of his customs and behaviors. Well, to understand that, let us come down to see how these 2 diverse forms form a reality in the case of study of man. It is believed that around 10 to 15 million years ago, a climatic change occurred, and this reduced most of the tropical forests into this kind of a savanna, an open land.
Our ancestral primates had to abandon their arboreal life and seek a terrestrial adaptation perforce. Those who remained on the trees to bully the weaker members of the band are still primates, and their descendants are the baboons and the gibbons. Those helpless ones who got pushed down to the ground life are our direct ancestors. It is argued that ground life required a series of anatomical readaptation.
To start with, it is argued that ground living required adaptation to hard nuts, roots, and berries, and this required a perfection of the chewing apparatus. For instance, there was a side-to-side movement required in the jaw, and this was achieved by the terrestrial bipedal adaptation.
You can see how the masticatory apparatus functions when one chews by putting some groundnut in your mouth and eat them in front of a mirror. You will at once realize that your jaw is moving side to side all the time. Give a toffee to your dog and see whether it does the same kind of movement of the jaw. If the dog cannot chew it, it is because of the projecting canines of the upper and lower jaw get locked when moved sideways.
one in the series of anatomical changes that occurs first is the reduction of the canine. Here we have a gorilla skull. You can see how big the canines are. And here you have a human skull where you see the canines have been totally reduced to the level of the other dental limits. This reduction of the canine in the human skull has enabled his side-to-side movement, and this side-to-side movement continuously pulled the lateral and parietal muscles and expanded the skull in the sideways direction. As a result of this, the neck muscles had to be brought down. In gorilla, the neck muscles are attached to a big shelf-like structure, whereas in a human being, you see the neck muscle has been reduced and they have come almost down to the base. It seems that the spinal cord also shifted to the base of the skull where my finger is.
It has been demonstrated that a complex brain structure, besides having numerous other parts, could sharpen the power to store experience and harness the same for primary adaptation.
Any animal can cut its toe while walking by the side of a river on broken stones. But it's man only who can record this experience in its complex brain ability. And this experience he can use by fabricating stones, which has cut his toes. He now fabricates it himself in order to harness this power to cut a skin outside. Now this ability was additionally required because in the process of evolution, he has lost the power of using the teeth and the nails that he had or his ancestors had. So it was imperative for him to make a tool of stone to replace what he lost in the body. A sharp border is prepared by way of giving alternate blows from one border and then another border.
Consequently, man emerges as the only animal which survives through a range of behaviors or activities in addition to the use of his body.
This ability can be taken as an extracorporeal media that man lives and lives by. Man has been able to adapt to varieties of environment, not so much with his biological apparatus as with the cultural apparatus. Very simply speaking, if you can't see a chimpanzee in the Arctic region or a camel in some forest region, it simply means that the adaptation of these two animals are geospecific. Whereas in the case of man, he can adapt from Arctic to the desert, and he does it only because he has perfected the ability of creating a medium of culture through which he seeks adaptation. Bipedal locomotion for the first time releases the hands. And these hands are two sensitive extensions of the brain and work on its command. Not only that, it includes 52 new varieties of motions in the hand, which can do enormous amount of functions that man has created since then.
Whether it is the sitar maestro Ravi Shankar or the tabla experts or the master craftsmen, the hands have been creating shapes and performing infinite number of commands.
In this process of increasing specialization of the brain, a stage came when, around 1 million years ago, when rut was suddenly withdrawn.
The system of rut is a phenomena in the brain that excites an animal for mating. For example, the behinds of a female monkey becomes red when rut excites her to ovulate, and it is a visible sign of invitation to the male. In many species, mating calls are prevalent.
This must have happened around the time of Homo erectus. When rut was withdrawn, then our ancestors were fertile for all round the 12 months of the year. But in its place, a large number of complex tactile centers were introduced as nerval stimulation centers for excitement. Thus, you find that a predisposition to making love was important before a lady was ready for mating, and this was counted by some as prehistory of love. Nobody could imagine that such a simple change in the brain could bring in such a complex change in behavior in a band of animals. Man had to have some kind of a bond relationship before it can mate and bring a new member to the unit. Thus, a band in a mating function was not purely mating only, but was also a cooperative unit for economic exploitation of resources. Thus, something like a proto-family develops. And this proto-family, therefore, acts as a unit together in a group rather than individual in what we call as egalitarian system of functioning. Well, this was all right, but along with that, a contradiction in the skeletal feature came about. There were two things working in the opposite direction. One, man had to walk erect, and the other, man was constantly requiring larger brain capacity. Walking erect brought down a narrowing of the birth canal. So a child could not be delivered with a larger brain capacity as evolution wanted it to. Thus, nature had to decide that a human child will be delivered much before its ultimate or optimum brain capacity is reached. It is believed that only 30% of the potential brain capacity of man is present when the child is born.
A human child when born is enormously more helpless than the newborn of any other species. Mother-child dependency period was naturally extended for as long as 3 years.
To sum up, one can say that this tiny change that has been brought about in the size of the teeth could bring about such a long series of changes in this unique creation called man, that they could bring a pyramid, they could build a pyramid in Egypt, or a satellite in the geostationary orbit, or a supercomputer. But one will wonder, what next? We have seen under what pressure and under what condition this animal called man evolved progressively through the past periods. It is believed that around 15 to 20 million years ago, this separation of the branch leading to man occurred. But it took about almost 8 million years before the first form of a new kind was first noticed. This was discovered from Punjab in India, and therefore it was named as Rama Pittacus. Rama Pittacus was only 2 to 3 feet height, most probably, and had not much change from his earliest ancestors, but his dental arch was remarkably humanoid, meaning it was approaching towards being like a human being.
Around 4 million years ago, we first noticed the appearance of more specialized and progress variety of our ancestors. This group was named Australopithecus. A complete skeleton of a 13 to 15-year-old female of this group was discovered some time back at Afrar in Ethiopia. It was nicknamed Lucy.
Although opinions vary about how this differentiation must have taken place in the past, but there are some who believe that both Rama Pittacus and chimpanzee and gorilla have originated and differentiated from a common stock. Let us pause here for a little while to look at a chimpanzee. To start with, one can see the hominoid characters that is evident even in this living ape. For instance, look at the snout, which has been reduced so considerably, the human-like eyes, and to top it all, the most important character of the thumb, which has become so exceedingly human-like and opposable so as to give a grip of humankind. Though one might be distracted by the generalized hairy nature of this as to form it an ape. This you see is an orangutan, which it is believed has differentiated much earlier than chimpanzee and gorilla from the general stock. And you can easily see that it has retained more ape features than chimpanzee. Australopithecus in this process of evolution was decidedly more progressed and advanced than his ancestors. Here we have a child skull of an Australopithecus, and we can see that he has developed his brain capacity to almost 100 or 150 cc more than the chimpanzees or gorillas, and it has become nearly 600 cc. However, the dental arch shows a remarkable humanoid development. The canines are totally reduced and is totally in level to the other teeth. It is believed that he must have also developed a reasonably erect gait, but he may not have been a very successful hunter. He has been basically a scavenging animal, and in this manner, with the biological apparatus that he developed out of evolution, he could colonize most of Africa and even survive for more than 2 to 3 million years duration. This period, he adapted himself to various ecozones, and geographical races were formed. These races are named as Makapanskat, Kromdrai, and even one which got a good popularity called Ginjanthropus bosai, which was discovered by the Leakes in the 1960s.
The path of progressive change or evolution had already set in, and the rule of the Australopithecus had to end one day.
This happened around 1.8 million years ago, when a form called Cheswanja was discovered from East Africa, and it was believed to be an Homo erectus. We usually name it as Homo erectus in technical terms, but popularly people have given it the name of Pithecanthropus. Homo erectus evolves into a larger brain capacity, almost as much as 900 cc, which is almost twice that of chimpanzee of today. His other features become humanoid, one can compare with the human skull. The dental arch becomes remarkably humanoid. It is believed that though he is called an erectus, he may have walked erect, but with a stooping gait like this. His spectacular success, as one sees it, in conquering the entire planet is not probably due to his evolved additional biological apparatus, but more so because of his cultural apparatus. These we may count as, number one, the creation of tools. A creation of tool that he could manipulate at his own will in order to supplement the working that his teeth and the jaw used to do earlier. Number two, the ability to create fire or domesticate fire, keep it alive, and also carry it with them in their nomadic habit. Number 3 was the most spectacular cultural ability created, it is believed, by these species, was the creation of a symbolic array of sounds which we today can call as language. The ability of these 3 apparatus made him cut across all geoclimatic barriers and spread all over the planet in no time. Consequently, we see the combination of brain and brawn for the first time in this period. And no wonder, with the ability of brain and brawn, he could conquer almost the entire world. And not only that, he could spread as far in east as Indonesia, Malaysia, China, and as far as southern Europe in the west. It is believed that from this basic substratum of Homo erectus, the subsequent types or human forms evolved. In Europe, the Neanderthals came, and in the rest of the world, a variety of early sapien or Homo sapien evolved from this base, and therefore Homo erectus is the direct ancestor of our kind. In India, however, only one form of a fragment has been found from Narmada in the Sihor district, which has been named as the Narmada man, and this is from a place called Hathnora. Narmada man, therefore, under the same logic, will be considered as the ancestor of all man from India. So far, we have talked about human evolution. In doing so, we have used the various somatic changes as milestones. However, it's a common knowledge that there can be no somatic character unless it is established in the genetic material. Otherwise, we would have had horses born out of a cow. In order to understand genetic change as an ongoing process, one has to study human genetics as an integral component of physical anthropology.
Well, one may ask at this juncture, what is so very different in human genetics that a biologist or a botanist or a zoologist cannot do? Well, fundamentally there is none. But in matter of perspectives, a human geneticist has to work in a different manner. For instance, one of the most important aspects that a human geneticist has to work on is to isolate those differences that come in the genetics by way of adaptation and isolate them from those that come from pure genetics.
Human beings cannot be experimented with, and also human beings work all the time on cultural imperatives. A human geneticist has to have entirely different strategies for study. This is further complicated by the fact that behavior can also seep down to the genetic level.
One of the classic examples of human behavior having percolated down to genetics is seen in Southeast Asia, where milk is a taboo because it is considered as a body pus, and therefore the genetics of these people have so modified through time that they cannot adapt to milk and digest it, and this has created a disease called lactase dehydrogenase deficiency.
We might take up the process of race formation. Genetics helps us to understand the process first, and with this one can study the various characters of the races as they evolved in different parts of the planet. We classify these human types according to group characteristics and group them as primary races or secondary races. The use of the term race by Hitler and consequently bringing about the Holocaust led to almost all anthropologists in the world to give up this term. Instead, this is now divided into ethnic study to include the social component of race and population genetics to include the physical dimension. The study of human growth from childhood to maturity is another complex phenomena studied under physical anthropology. The genetic basis may decide the direction in which the changes would occur in a human child, but the rate at which this occurs may depend entirely on nutrition and occupation chosen by the individual. Naturally, one has to study human physiology, body transpiration, fat thickness, and relative proportion of body parts as well.
If certain ideal physical types exist for certain sports events, let us see how we can manipulate the non-genetic component of human growth from the time of known genetic material. This has to be done during the period of growth. Obviously, the Sports Council of India today employs a large number of sports anthropometry for deciding on the best kind of sportsmen that one can have.
A comparatively recent development is kine anthropometry. This helps devise efficient postures in machine operation by taking dynamic measurements on human body. Car seats, aeroplane cockpits, and even manned spaceships are extensively utilizing expertise of anthropology in devising seats, angle of gears, and even the position of control panels.
If the study of human variation and human genetics could be harnessed to use better sportsmen or create better sportsmen, and also if it could be used to increase efficiency in the ever-increasing mechanized life of mankind, it can also be harnessed to relieve the misery of man by way of understanding what is known as genetic load. I would ask Professor Ghosh to now explain how it is done to relieve human miseries.
In anthropology, we are interested in two types of mutations. One mutation is with subtle change, not drastic change, which contributes towards the variation in human population and which forms the raw material for studying of human variation for anthropologists. The other major mutation is the one which has a lot of deleterious effect. Sometimes it becomes lethal. So it becomes, besides studying variation for an anthropologist, also becomes important for the anthropologist to study the extent of mutation load in human population and the ways and means, to devise ways and means to reduce this mutation load in human population, and that is precisely what we do in genetic counseling. One of the important mutations in this direction is the chromosomal mutations exemplified in terms of Down syndrome, a trisomy 21. Now, Down syndrome is important because it is the single most chromosomal defect which is contributing towards most of the chromosomal abnormalities. For example, total chromosomal load is 6 per thousand, and Down syndrome contributes 1.2. And since Down syndrome is correlated with maternal age, that means as and when the maternal age increases, the frequency of Down syndrome increases. For example, for a 26-year-old mother, the frequency of Down syndrome is 1 around 3,000. And for a mother who is more than 40, this frequency becomes 1 in 100 to 1 in 60. So there is a dramatic increase in the mutational load. So if we screen all mothers who are pregnant at the age of 35 or more than 35, then it will be possible to reduce at least this chromosomal mutation from human population. And an estimate is that if all mothers at the age of 35 are screened, that the mutational load of Down syndrome will be reduced by around 40%.
We have traversed a long distance from human evolution, the various somatic changes, genetics, anthropometry of sports, and at this juncture of human destiny, one would definitely like to ask, can we tamper with human inherited material and thereby change the destiny of man for future?